Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on Next.js and Gatsby.js, solving your React problems, or is it? So I'm Jonathan on behalf of the Explorer Dev community hosting this webinar, sponsored by Capstars. Uh, Before we start off, a quick audio check. If you can hear me, please type yes on the chat. Meanwhile, let me remind you that this webinar is brought to you as part of our Explorer Dev community meetups. Given the current situation and with most of us working from home, we're happy to bring this special webinar to help many of us keep up to date with emerging technologies. And I believe most of you will make most of this time. So before we start, I'll just quickly ensure that we have a good experience over this webinar. So let me just quickly remind you that most of you all are on mute. But however, if you have any questions, you can use the question and answer option on the chat, also on the chat. So the chat box is also available. So if you want to pass a message, please type in your questions and we'll try to answer as much as possible on the go. So let me, without any further ado, introduce you to our speakers today. Harsha, Wijendra, Senior Software Engineer at Capstars, along with Ruhaim Ismat, Senior Architect at Capstars. They'll be talking more on Next.js, taking you through the features and a few demos as well. And followed by Mohamed Muhsin, Senior React Developer RT Camp. We're really happy to have him as well on board. And he's going to take us through Gatsby.js. So let me hand over this to Harsha. Give us a few minutes. Just over to you, Harsha.
All right. Okay, so let me get this stuff sorted out. Let me share my screen. Okay. So you can see my screen now, yeah? Just come in. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jonathan. I welcome everyone, and I hope everyone is doing pretty well. You know, it's a tough time, and I hope everyone's staying safe. And to give a quick introduction about myself, you know, my name is Harsha Wijendra, and I work as a senior software engineer at Capstars. So looking at the topic that we have in hand today, right? So we have Next.js and we have Gatsby. You know, both of these are actually frameworks, you know, have a lot of the things in common, right? At the first glance itself, like, you know, if you really have a look at it, you know, they provide a boilerplate code that, you know, just like in the create React app, right? So out of the box, you can create your single page application, right? And they actually gives you a really awesome developer experience. But does React actually fulfill all your requirements? Now, for example, if you, well, React is pretty famous. You know, well, we all know React is a single page application that lets you do client-side routing as well, right? And then, so why React is famous? So React is famous is because, you know, we all know it's because it's performance, right? So it is very efficient when you have data that, you know, changes very frequently over time. And so if you do have an application like that, lot of people, you know, started using React. But does React really fulfill all your requirements? So let's have a look into that. So then, yes, we all know React is fast, but can it actually be made faster, right? So just to give a quick overview about React itself. Now, for example, like when it comes to performance, right? It does have a decreased load on your server itself. why I'm saying that, it's because, on your client, right? So you have your business logic on when it comes to your application, right? And then, so React actually, it takes all that business logic and all, it actually runs on your client. So running on your client, right? So then actually, so all that business logic, everything runs on client. And so it's more like a vacation to your server, so your resources, your RAM memory on your server, can be, used to perform other tasks, right? So that's a good thing when it comes to React. And then also static hosting and caching, right? So we all know, so static application itself, right, doesn't really need a server behind it. But of course, in order to run your the data transition, you need a third party. You need your backend services differently. But just to have deploy a static website, so you can use something like a CDN for you can use a CDN and then do your static hosting and caching, right? But okay, so these are all good things about React. But when you really look into it, right, and then we have a we so as a React developer, so we all see that the very first time your client, your user, opens your web application, it has a very slow initial render. And why that? It's because at the very first go itself, your React, your server sends you a lot of JS bundles, right? For you to download, right? So this include your framework itself, like whether it's React, whether it's Angular, and your application code itself. And let's take your network latency for an example. And if you have a pretty bad network connection at the moment, your overall experience when it comes to your uh, overall experience when it comes to logging into your website, or your client logging into your website, is going to be not going to be a very good one, right? So also when it comes to hardware, right, so you're not going to have the same performance downloading, rendering when it comes to mobile devices. So you need to optimize this, right? And the reason why I'm saying this, it's also sort of now when you look at it, React is actually very JavaScript dependent, right? So it's very dependent on JavaScript. So for example, I found this on I found this online, also from another tech talk, right? So where he actually looks at, right, what are the steps that actually your browser does, when it actually renders, when it actually downloads your JavaScript, right? For example, so all these steps, right? So now if you have a look at it, so so the browser actually checks whether you have JavaScript turned off, right? And some people still do have JavaScript turned on when it comes to website. And looking at another edge case, right? Do they have Chrome data saver mode turned on, right? But if they do, right? So let's say you're on a 2G connection, right? Which means you're on a slow connection, the Chrome will automatically disable all scripting, right? So even though we don't give this much of a thought, right? But it actually, since there are a lot of dependencies, right? There are many ways that it could go wrong. So do we have a solution that could um, avoid this, bring that meaningful content of your website as soon as possible to the user? Well, we do. And then if you also have the question, if you ask yourself the question, is React SEO friendly? Well, if you really look at client-side rendering applications, traditionally they are not very SEO friendly, right? So single-page applications, when you actually send your request to the server, all what you get, it's a very empty all what you get is a HTML page. It's a very basic HTML with some HTML markup, and it'll have just one div, which will have as your single entry point to the application. So although a lot of people, because, and the other thing is, J is actually, so when you are downloading, when you after downloading all that JavaScript, after that only your DOM will get populated. DOM stands for document object model, right? So it will get generated. So because of that, right? So it's not very SEO friendly when it comes to client-side rendering applications. Also, since it doesn't really have routes, right? Multi-page applications, multi-pages, right? So can this be addressed using a framework? Let me hold on to that thought. So React is a solution to build website. Of course it is. It has many advantages of using React, and then okay, so we talked about the downsides. If there is a way that actually we can avoid all that, so then we can build a very good performing website. So, and the other question that I want to look at is a perfect Google page speed score is a reality? Well, sometimes, I mean, if you have a look at the matrices, right, when it comes to page speed, right, it look at your first content, your first meaningful content, and also it looks at your first colorful content, right, and then so what basically means is like the time that actually it takes, for your user to actually have a meaningful content drawn on the web page, right? So without further ado, right, so we also, to actually demonstrate this, so we actually built a coronavirus tracker, a simple coronavirus tracker dashboard, right? So, and to actually compare, so we built this using client-side rendering as well as server-side rendering. So to talk about, so if you look at the points that I addressed earlier, so I said client-side rendering applications are very JavaScript dependent, right? So, all right. So you have this web page. So for the future notes, now if the tab has the favicon, that is actually the client-side rendered application, as well as now if this is our server-side rendered application. So what I'm going to do right now, right? I'm going to go to DevTools, right? Settings, and I'm going to disable JavaScript. So just take a guess, like, what would happen if you render your, if you try to request your client rendered application, if your JavaScript is disabled, right? Let's see. Okay, so well, basically your browser actually send a connection, browser actually send a request into your web page, sorry, your server, right? But you can't download all that JavaScript and then draw the content that you build, the DOM that you actually want, right? So if you have a look at the response, right? Yes, you have the HTML, right? And you have, yes, you have the HTML, but there's nothing much that you can actually do with it, right? So let's think of this for an example. So client-side rendering applications doesn't really take advantage of this particular method, right? So it actually sends a request, just get one and just get like a simple HTML markup, right? It'll have one div, right? It can have multiple divs, but most of the time it will have one div, a single entry point to your application, and the rest it will all execute on client side. But so what if, for an example, if you think, okay, so, you're going to build all that on the server, right? You're going to implement your CSS, you're going to build some client side app, you're going to build your HTML, right? And I will send that to their browser, right? So the users will have, as soon as possible, users will have the first meaningful content. So while the user is actually looking at that content, so there you can, so on the background, then it will actually download all that necessary JavaScript buttons. For a quick demo, right? So this is our server-side rendering application, same UI, calling the same API, right? And then for this also, let's disable JavaScript. Just take a guess what will happen. So if I request this right now, right? Okay, so our map is now rendered, but if you have a look at the preview, oh, so you actually have some data, right? A pre-rendered data. So this is actually your HTML page, and there are some server-side included style sheets, as that we have gotten as a response. So if you actually do look at the response, right? So you actually have like so you actually have like a CSX object as well as your HTML markup. So also you see that 87, right? So this is actually not a static value, right? This is actually rendered dynamically, right? So we'll look into that furthermore. So this actually rendered, this value itself actually rendered on the client, right? So sorry, it's actually rendered on the server, right? And also, yes. So also, if you want to look at it further, there are many ways that you can actually draw your map also, when it comes to client's server-side rendering. So we looked at all that, right? So we have a basic idea, okay, so a client-side rendering application like Next, right, can actually give us all that. It'll actually be helpful with SEO. It'll actually be helpful when it actually, performance-wise, to get rid of that problem when it comes to your initial rendering, right? And so let's dig a little deeper, right? And let's have a look at, okay, so what Next actually provides us. What is Next? And for that, I'm actually handing over the presentation to my good friend Ruhaim. Ruhaim?
Yes, thank you, Harsha. Can you hear me well?
Yes, Ruhaim. Okay.
All right, great. Okay, thanks for your demonstration. So I think you can stop sharing your screen. Let me share mine.
Yes.
Yeah, so hi guys, hi everyone. Hope you have a good evening. And then thank you, Harsha, for your introduction, setting the stage for what React is and what are the shortfalls that we have if we stuck only using React. So what my discussion would be, first to introduce you to certain words, certain definitions that you might need to know for you to actually master or grasp the real understanding of each of these terms. So the main three terms that we would be constantly, or at least I would be constantly talking about today, would be SSR, SR, and CSR, which is server-side rendering, static rendering, and client-side rendering. So we will dig deep into what each and every each and every term defines, how it works, and how mainly they are different to each other, right? So from the slide that you see here right now, you can see that Next.js supports static rendering and server-side rendering, and React on the other side supports client-side rendering. So I'm just going to take you through a journey on how we see the world from an HTML or from an outsider perspective, not from a developer perspective, but from an outsider perspective, and then slowly go into the technical details and then understand how actually things work underneath when a website is actually getting rendered. So this is not an HTML lesson, but I think that we need to start with the basics for us to grasp the real idea behind behind the three terms that I previously showcased, right? So we have a simple HTML page. which actually loads up a CSS file, and then it loads up another JS file, which is named get API data.
So meantime, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A section, and then, we are happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, so you could put in your questions there. So I will try to rush this as fast as possible, but then keep it slow enough so that you could understand it. But then if there were some things that you didn't get it or was not clear, please put it up on the chat. We will take it up afterwards, right? So we have a lot of content to cover. So that is the reason why I might be going a little faster. But then, yeah, I hope that you understand. Right, so we have the CSS file that loads up, and then we have a JS file again that loads up on the browser, which is named get API data. So what it does actually is, it goes out and calls. Assume that it goes out and calls an API method residing somewhere and gets some data of the server and displays it inside this API content section, right? So you see this content that I've color coded. So keep an idea, just mark the colors that I've specified these things. And then we'll jump in to see how a browser, when it reads this HTML, and tries to render the content, how it actually starts to behave, right? So I'll get into the rendering flow. So you can see three bars going from top to bottom. It's something like a sequence diagram, but I wouldn't say it is a sequence diagram because it's slightly different. So you have this client who is requesting for an index HTML, and then you have the browser with which he's interacting, and then you have a server at the right-hand corner, right? So as soon as the browser gets a request, it makes a call to the backend, and it basically asks for the index.html. The browser, the server looks at it, returns the index.html, and as soon as the index.html, in this case that the HTML that I previously showcased, if that content, as soon as that content is available on the client, what the browser would start doing is it would pass the HTML file and try to figure out if there are any external dependencies that it needs to download. So in this case, we have two external dependencies, which is the CSS and the JavaScript. And immediately what the browser does is it triggers two calls to the backend and waits for the CSS to load. The CSS loads back, and then we have the JavaScript that gets loaded. And now what the browser, now it has the necessary content, it has a CSS and the JavaScript. But as soon as the JavaScript is loaded on the browser needs to do some passing on the JavaScript, which again takes some time. So by time, I mean, this is not seconds, this is some milliseconds, but every milliseconds counts when it comes to rendering a web page or a website, right? Because that is going to be critical. We will be discussing about that in the coming slides. So there will be some time that the browser will take for it to analyze the JavaScript that it received and figure out, right, it needs, this JavaScript file needs to make a call to the backend and get some data. So for it to figure it out, it spends some time. So after it's done that, it has a passed JS. And then through the passed JS, which gets executed, it makes a call back again to the backend, requesting for the API data. Once the API data is received, it has the API data, which comes in as a JSON content. And immediately as the JSON content is received on the browser again has to do some serialization in order to convert this JSON string into a JavaScript object, which again takes some time. So you could see, right, the number of arrows that has got drawn is very, like, though we had a very simple HTML page, it has now taken up so many activities are taking place under the hood before an actual fully rendered site is ready for it to be shown to the user, right? So this is a very simple case, but imagine a real life HTML page which has numerous CSS, numerous JavaScripts, and all of this needs to be loaded up. It needs to be rendered. It needs to be parsed. All of those things need to be done before a site can be considered fully rendered, right? So after all this has happened, the user will get to see that this thing, this website, this index.html that he requested for is already available for him to see. But in between, during this time, until from the initiation of the the request for the index.html up to the point where it gets fully rendered, the browser doesn't stay idle. What it does, what it tries to do is, with little content that it already has got in certain stages, it starts to display certain content on the screen for the user to see. So you can see that I've numbered certain, I've put some numbers and then drawn some eyes on the left-hand corner of the screen. And then these are going to be kind of, checkpoints that we would be peeking into to see how the content gets loaded on the screen. And finally, we have this bot, which is the search engine bot of, say, Google, for example, which crawls the internet, trying to figure out what content is there out there for it to index. So a bot usually starts indexing what it sees at the initial content that it gets loaded. So this is, in a nutshell, what an HTML rendering, a simple HTML rendering flow is on a browser. So like I said, right, CSR is short for client-side rendering. I will be using this acronym in the coming slides. So keep that in mind. Okay. So what I have done now here is that I've basically broken down each and every snapshot or checkpoint, and then made it show this box. Each box here shows what the user is going to see on the browser. So you could see that at the initial content, we saw that on the HTML page that we had your content here being rendered. And as soon as the content is there, you can see that the content is available and it is shown, but it is not styled. Only after the CSS has been received, the styling takes place, where the font of it has got changed and its weight has got has got to bold, right? So immediately after the JS file has passed, then it makes a call to the backend where it makes a change on the DOM saying that, this page is now loading. It is waiting for data to come. And immediately afterwards, after it receives the data and the JSON is passed, it renders hello CSR. So you can see that it is at this point, right, the actual content that needs to be there is only rendered at the point number 4, right, at the checkpoint number 4. And everything before that are just dummy data, right? Your content here is dummy data, your content here again is dummy data, and loading is also dummy data. So we have a delayed time. Since this is the time, we have a delayed period that we need to stay until we see the actual content. And if we move on to static rendered or server-side rendered pages, a marked difference that you could see is that the hello SSR, though in our HTML page that we initially rendered, there was your content here, the server-side rendering actually has brought in the hello SSR and put it into the HTML content, right? And then the CSS loads and it styles the content that we received. Then while keeping the content that we already have, it makes a call to the backend, and then it basically revalidates the content that it needs to show. So until that, we don't need to wait until the 4th step. Right at the first step, we are able to see the content that actually what we need to see, which, though it might be a few milliseconds for the user, it is essential for the bot for the Google bot to make an index of this specific content, because only if the Google bot is able to index this, would some person will be able to search that content on their Google or whatever the search engine that they use, and finally end up on our website, because we do already have that content on our page. So you see a marked difference between the two here. So what I need to highlight to you is that on a CSR, on a client-side rendered application, you see the actual content, the real content being loaded at point number 4, which is right at the end, almost at the end. But in server-side rendered and static rendered applications, you have it right there, the first drawn stage from a blank screen. It will be the actual content the user is going to see. More than the user, it is the Google bot who will be using it to index the content. So we might be saying, okay, why do we need to worry so much about, a few milliseconds or a few seconds of delay? Why are we so focused about, trying to have content ready during that milliseconds? But the actual thing is that SEO is very important. And these are a few stats that I pulled out from the internet. Anyone has to does a search first before he actually jumps into a web page. So most of the clients are going through the search for them to find their content. And you see the point here, right? Someone might argue that we could pay to Google and then have our website appear right on the top because we paid them. But users are now, they have involuntarily said themselves that they ignore these ads and they go right only to the search bar, right? Only for the actual content that the search returns. So SEO is really important. And you can see, so at this point, at checkpoint 1, we understood that SSR is actually SEO friendly, right? Because the content is ready for you to see. And then it is accessible, because not all the people who have, like Harsha demonstrated, all the people who don't have JavaScript, even if you have JavaScript disabled, if you are a differently able person, still you will be able to access the content because of static site rendering or static rendering or server-side rendering. So I will rush through now. So that is SEO. Now let's get into speed, right? So this is another stat, right? Every 40% of the people, right, abandon a website if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. So this is what Harsha was explaining. So I need you to focus on this point, right? So any website that is considered that loads within the first 2 seconds is considered good in Google's terms. And if it takes anything more than 4 seconds, it is going to impact your SEO rankings. It is going to impact your SEO strategy as well. So we'll always try to focus on this specific number. Always try to reduce the initial load that we have for us to load it faster. So getting back to the arrows, right? So a request passing, right? So we saw a group of requests being passed initially. So here I'm actually trying to demonstrate to you how Google sees certain things, right? So if you sent a request from the client to the server, from the browser to the server, if it was a if it was a heavy request, then it will take some time before it is ready before the server is able to take it up and process. And it will take some time for it to process the request. And if the response that it needs to send is a large content, until all the content is sent to the user, there is again a time that the user needs to wait, which is highlighted in this diagram, right? So what we ideally want is a fast request and a response. So for you to do a fast request and a response, there are 3 things that we can optimize. One is try to minimize the request payload size. That's the initial payload we send to the browser. And then to minimize the number of operation that takes place while this waiting period, which is T2, and then try to minimize the response payload that is sent back to the browser. So in this case, it is taking about 2 seconds, 1.4 seconds for the user to actually take in the content, and then before it is ready for the client to use it. So this is just an example, but what we are trying to do is minimize these things, minimize the request payload size, minimize the response payload size, and minimize the number of operations or the time it takes for doing the operations on the process, on the server, right? So going into client-side rendering, right? You see, this is the HTML page, the initial HTML page, initial request that comes in, right? So when you have the CDN, when you have a static HTML or a static JS file, what happens is that the client-side rendered application, the server, as soon as the server gets this request, it just goes in, fetches the HTML file, and returns it back to the user. So there is immediate response. There is, you can see that there is less waiting time. This time that it takes is, very low. You just come into the file server or the CDN, fetch the file, and return it back to the user. So there is minimal waiting time within the server for it to complete the request, the initial request. But when it comes to a server-side rendered application, right, the initial request that it gets, right, it will first, it could go in and then talk to a database or an API and fetch the data that is required, which in the case of Harsha, the number 87 that you saw, the count, the corona patient count, was something that was fetched off the server at the time it was requested, right? And there could be other things that could be done while this data is being fetched. For example, you could split the JavaScript code, or you could optimize the CSS configurations based on the page that is being rendered. Suppose you have just one div on your application, but you have a CSS file that has thousands of CSS definitions. But these thousands of CSS definitions are not going to be necessary just to style one div, right? So on the server side, the server is able to optimize and then eliminate all the styles that are not necessary and push in only the styles that are necessary, maybe only for that div. And in addition to doing the optimization, it also could do some authorization to figure out if this person is actually a registered user. It could do some internationalization. It could then assemble all the response, all the components, this component that it got, this component here, the components it received here, assemble it in a way that it could be sent back to the client. So that is how a server-side rendered application. So this is something, if you have been working with other server-side technologies, like for example, Java or .NET or what other server-side languages, this is something similar that we do with a server-side rendered Next application as well. Then we come into a static rendered web application. This, mind you, is no different than a client-side rendered application. It is just that you come in, the server gets an initial request, it comes into the file system, picks up an HTML file and returns it back. It doesn't do any other operations at all. But the secret behind it is what you're going to see now. So what happens with a static rendered application is that you have something called a static site generator that uses a Jamstack, which talks to several components where it could fetch data from. So it'll talk to JavaScript. It will be getting JavaScript files, talk to databases, maybe CMSs, and what it does is it pre-creates an HTML file that would be that would cater to the request that will come in later. So this HTML file is something that is pre-rendered of a dynamic script somewhere and put in place before, way before this request comes in. So for the end user, if the server is hitting the file system, it is not generating anything at that time, but it is only getting an already generated file and returning back to the user. So that is in short what the three differences between server-side rendered, client-side rendered, and a static rendered application. So at this checkpoint, we will see, right, what we could achieve. Now, what we were talking about was speed that we wanted to achieve. So with static rendered applications, you can achieve that speed because the content is returned immediately, though it has been preset by a predefined script that was running before, right? So it helps to go serverless, it is inexpensive to host, it is highly secure. So all these features are available with a static rendered website. But there are some downfalls when it comes to static rendering. It is not the solution for every problem. So that is where, serving only essential content, that is to alter the content based on the request, to add internationalization while maintaining SEO. Plus, if you are behind a user login, if you need to get an authenticated exposure to specific application, yeah, server-side render is not going to work. So that is where, static rendering is not going to work, and that is where server-side rendered applications will start to come into way. And not think that we would pause here now, give the opportunity for could introduce Gatsby.js to you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, see my video, and also hear me? Okay, fantastic. Let me go ahead. Again, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here with us, and thanks to the Explorer community for putting this together and for inviting me to speak to you all. My talk today is titled Build Your Blazing Fast Site with Gatsby. And you can follow me on Twitter at Muhsin LK. And let me talk a little bit about myself. My name is Mohamed Muhsin, and I am a senior React developer at RTCam. We are a WordPress VIP agency from India and the US. I also like to write. I have written for publications like Smashing Magazine, among others. I love to travel as well. This was when I was in India last year, coding at a coffee shop. This was at a safari park in Sri Lanka, and this is in Jaffna, Sri Lanka. Let's talk a little bit about Jamstack. So if this looks familiar to you, yes, Jamstack is just as tasty as this, but not as similar as this picture. Jamstack refers to the three words JavaScript, APIs, and markup. JavaScript because all the programming happens only in JavaScript among these class of sites. And all the communication, everything is coded in JavaScript and the logic as well. Now, APIs because all the server-side data accessing and communication with the server side happens only via APIs. there is no server-side templating such as you get with PHP or with ASP.NET. It all happens via API. It can be REST API or even GraphQL, as we'll see later. Now, markup, because all the markup in Jamstack sites are always pre-rendered or pre-built at deploy time. So when you visit it, it's already ready for you and it will serve it to you. So let's talk about this term as well, which Ruhaim also covered. Let's go quickly. Static site generators are a tool that allows you to get content. It can be any type of content, a markdown file, a JSON file, a GraphQL API, CMS like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla, and then combine it with a template to give you a static site, which can be hosted anywhere for very cheap hosting prices and for fast access. These are some very famous static site generators: Hugo, which is built using Go language, and Jekyll, which uses Ruby, and also Gitbook, which is very popular among educators to give out their content. Today, we are going to talk about something called Gatsby. Now, I would not say Gatsby is a static site generator because it's much more than that. It became popular as a very famous React-based static site generator, but it has transformed into a full-fledged application framework now. So why Gatsby? Gatsby is blazing fast because when you take a typical CMS like WordPress, it is connected. It has a server-side language like PHP, and it connects to a MySQL database, and it collects all the data from MySQL and use PHP to template it out and give you the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, when you have a Gatsby site, the content, the HTML or CSS or JavaScript already ready for you. It can even be on top of a CDN. It can be like served to you at an instantaneously. It's also like one of the easiest ways for you to get 100% across the board with the Lighthouse, Lighthouse audit which you have in the Chrome Inspector DevTools. So it's relatively easy for you to get that score with Gatsby. Now, Gatsby is also extremely secure because, as I told, it is static files which are hosted on a static server. There is no server connection which can compromise your server. It's all static files. Not that it can't be hacked, but it's very rare that a Gatsby site can be hacked. It's extremely secure. It's also very cheap. And about this hacking part, even if you hack, what can you do? Like, you just have the static pages, and like you can't make the server vulnerable. It's very hard to do that with them. And it's also extremely cheap. Like, my personal site is Gatsby site, and it's hosted free of cost on a host called Netlify. So you can read about Sam, who is the co-founder of Gatsby, about his article where he has written this company went from $5,000 a month to just $5 a month when they moved to Gatsby. So you can imagine how like cost effective it is to host on a very cheap static server. And it also has an awesome developer experience because like it has combined the best of giving a great developer experience with giving the best user experience. For example, when you have Gatsby, let's talk about accessibility. So accessibility, because when you have an image tag, so you also have to give an alt attribute. Like, most developers would do that because people who cannot see a screen will make out what the image is based on the alt attribute. So when you code a Gatsby site, it will actually remind you to put an alt attribute for your image. So it is what like helping the developer and giving them a good developer experience, and at the same time giving the user a great user experience, even for people who cannot see the screen. And also other features like using the reach router to route between pages, which is great for single page application routing, like a React router. It's much better in terms of accessibility than the traditional React router. And it's also easy to get started because of the great docs that it has, and extremely great awesome tutorials that they have written, which is great for like beginners. And also like lots of beginners are here sharing their experiences either through video, audio, like podcasts, and also by writing tutorials based on the experience with Gatsby. And you are able to learn React and GraphQL on the go when you choose Gatsby, because it essentially takes you to the journey of learning these two languages. Like it says Gatsby helped me get started with React and GraphQL. You can watch this video when I share the screen. You can click on this and watch the video. Okay, the hype is real. Okay, let's see what really is Gatsby. So what is Gatsby? It is a blazing fast React-based web framework. It's more than a static site generator. And also it uses GraphQL in the data layer. So GraphQL, because I believe it's like the ultimate way to have access content from a backend or like from a schema, and it connects to multiple APIs. It can be contentful CMS or WordPress or Joomla or Drupal. It can be Shopify. It can even be a Markdown file. It can even be a Markdown or a like JSON file, and even a GraphQL or REST API endpoint. Like pretty much any API that you have, you can bring it and make it a source for a Gatsby site. And with Gatsby, you build Jamstack sites as I spoke, and it hydrates to a React app. That's very important because it's not just a static site generator. It is now a React framework. Now, like if you have been used to the React hooks, you can use all your React hooks here. Like if you have been used to other React libraries, you can bring them here, and they will most probably work. Yes. And also let's see a few sites like Gatsby pages. Now this is the Gatsby homepage, gatsbyjs.org. Now you can see it says fast in every way that matters because they have optimized it very well. And you can see it's fetching from contentful such content management systems or Markdown or any database or any JSON file. And it connects to like powered by GraphQL, and you get these to your user. Now you can see here that even React uses Gatsby. Let me refresh. Yeah, React is here. So even React is using Gatsby. How does React use Gatsby, you may ask? So the React documentation, the official React documentation is also a Gatsby site. So surprise. So you can visit to learn more. Now, if you want to learn more about how Gatsby works and how it is built and what is happening behind the scenes about the internals of Gatsby, you can check it out at /doc/Gatsby internals about how it fetches data and builds to create a static page for you. Okay, now this is a brief comparison between the different Jamstack sites like Next.js and Hugo and so on. As you can see, Gatsby is great for static hosting, and it's also great for progressive image loading or responsive image loading, meaning when you have an image and it will essentially load the part of the image, just a basic image like a placeholder, and lazily it will load the rest of the image. You can even like have beautiful animations when it loads. It can appear from a SVG into a full-fledged big size image. And it also has a few other nifty features like serverless features, and also accessibility and security. And it's also great for things like that. And as you can see, like I won't cover everything, but if you want to, you can visit this page /features/Jamstack to learn more. So let's talk a little more. This is my site. Let me show you. I'm showing you because I want to show you why it's so fast. First of all, I'll show you I'm gonna reload the page, hard refresh, and even on a very busy connection, it loaded pretty fast. So I'm gonna click on blog. As you can see how fast it loads, how fast the different pages load. Between pages. And you may ask why the pages are loading very fast. So let me show the reason for it. Now, if I go to the network tab in Chrome, and let me hover over a page, you can see the page is loading in the background. So let me hover over this page, see it loading in the background. So when I click on it, it's already there for you, let me show again. So I'm gonna click on this. It's already loading in the background, as you can see. So once it's loaded, I'm gonna click it and it's already there for you. It's already ready for you to do it. So that's called prefetching. It's what makes it fast. Okay, getting back to the slides. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about GraphQL, the data layer for Gatsby. With GraphQL, it's a query language with which you ask what you need and you get exactly that, no more and no less. It's an alternative REST API, and I would argue it's a much better alternative to REST API. And with GraphQL, you have one endpoint rather than each endpoint for each resource like you had in REST API. And you get many resources in a single request, as in, like, if you have a WordPress GraphQL API, you would, if you want to get the author of the post with the post content, you wouldn't have two requests. Or if you want to get the featured image as well, you don't have three requests. You just have one request, and you get all of that in one part, which is good for the environment as well, because your less data is traveling through the wire. So it's created by Facebook, and now it's open source, and it's just a specification, and anyone can implement a GraphQL server. Using Gatsby with WordPress, because Gatsby is a data source we are using, and it's just an example of any like data you can use, any CMS that you can use. Gatsby is another example. So with Gatsby, if you're using, you have the WordPress REST API, or like you have something called WP GraphQL, which I would recommend. Let's talk a little bit about it. You have to install this plugin in your Gatsby site, which will fetch data from a GraphQL server, and then WP GraphQL is a WordPress plugin which you install on your WordPress site, and it's a faster and more scalable way than REST API. So WP GraphQL exposes WordPress data as GraphQL schema. It is an open source project created by Jason Ball, and it's maintained by the community. And by the way, this project is sponsored by Gatsby, the company, Gatsby JS Inc. And with this, it's a WordPress plugin, and it also has add-ons for WordPress features like advanced custom fields, WooCommerce, and so on. So let's run through how to start a Gatsby project. It's relatively easy. Once you have Node and NPM on your computer, NPM install global and Gatsby CLI. That will install the Gatsby CLI on your computer. And then Gatsby new and the name of the project, for example, my project. And then you change directory into your project and Gatsby develop. So let's do a quick demo. I have actually done this 1, 2, 3. 3 commands are done. I'm going to just put the Gatsby develop command. Okay. Meanwhile, let's see how the Gatsby site looks like. Obviously, you have the package.json file where you have the dependencies and the scripts, and then we have the node modules folder where all the node modules are installed. This is a public folder which you can copy and paste on any static host, and it will give you a static site. And the cache folder is used for building. And now the Gatsby config folder is what contains the configuration, like the website name, the description, and the author example. And also the different plugins. This React Helmet is used for SEO, search engine optimization, and Gatsby source file system. These are for images and like getting local files. And this is like a manifest for your, if you go offline or if you make a PWA, you can give this manifest file for that. The offline plugin, if you enable it, will create an offline ready application for your website. Now let's look at how the component, like this is a source folder, and these are the components, the default components, and some images and pages. These are the most important, like to put a content in. Just if you want to put a new page in, you add one new component to this React component to this page. Let's see how this site looks like. So has 8,000, and this is the site that we developed. So now if I want to go to page 2, you can see how fast it is. Let's quickly build a new page. I'm going to call it explorer.js. Copy over some content from here. Put it here. Explorer page. Hi Explorer, and welcome to Explorer page. Go back to home page. Okay, now I'm going to give this link to the home page. Go to now if I see here, go to Explorer page, I click here and I'm taken to the Explorer page. You can see how fast it is to create a new page. There is no, like, you don't have to configure a React router or any router for your React app. Now, let's get back here. Okay. on getting started, this is a quick start guide to get you quickly started with Gatsby. If you want to learn more about Gatsby before you want to get started, you can click on this link. And this is a Gatsby plus WordPress site, which I showed you, my personal site. And yeah, this is the site we saw. And let's talk about a little bit about contributing to Gatsby. How to contribute, you can read more here. And about if you want to contribute in code, you can read here. And this is my contribution. I actually wrote a blog post for the Gatsby site, how to use React Context API with Gatsby, about how you can enable dark mode for your Gatsby site. So if you contribute, they will actually give you some swag. So I got a t-shirt, Gatsby t-shirt, for contributing to the Gatsby core. If you should actually have a successful PR merge, then you will get to select from a set of swag. So I would encourage you to contribute, not just for the swag, but for the excitement of contributing to a very popular open source software such as Gatsby. So what we covered, Jamstack and static search generators, Gatsby, and how to use it with WordPress, about this Gatsby plugin, about the WordPress plugin, and yes, next steps. This is an article I wrote about how Gatsby and WordPress are the competitors, or can you use them together? And I also wrote a tutorial on creating a Gatsby theme. This is a whole new topic in Gatsby. And this is one more podcast, like a web lesson about using Gatsby with WordPress. And this is a talk about Gatsby and WordPress. Yes, so one more message for you. Let us spread kindness. So let us spread kindness, love, and positivity. Let us not spread the virus. And thank you for having me. You can still follow me on @MuhsinLK on Twitter. And if you have any questions, you can ask here, or you can reach out to me directly at mohamed@articamp.com. And Articamp is hiring. If you are looking for a remote job, or if you are looking to work with me, you can click on rt.camp/join to see any opportunities that you like. And also a shout out to tomorrow's event. Tomorrow, this event is starting at 5 a.m., I believe. So, so some of my friends are speaking here, wordsesh.com. Please check out. And also, Chatu from the Sri Lankan JavaScript community is speaking. They are a good event. It's about WordPress. It's also covering topics like Jamstack and progressive web applications. Shout out to Imran, who is also a speaker there. Yeah, that's it from me. Thanks, everybody.
So can you quickly remind everyone that we'll be having Q&A session in a while. So do bring in your questions as soon as possible. I've seen that some of the questions coming in from YouTube as well. So I believe Ruhaim will take you through the few other demos in play.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, Muhsin, for your introduction on Gatsby. So we will continue with what Next.js has to offer. So these two are sort of competing technologies. So why we had Gatsby also coming was to give you guys a clear idea on what other alternatives are there, and which one might be best for you guys, right? So we will just jump into the Next.js features. I will not be going into the code level. So like it's a few slides that we will need to rush through. So I'll just go in, right? So these are in a nutshell what the features of Next.js are, right? These are the factors that keep it away from the competition, or sort of keep it above the competition. So you can see that Next.js is actually an extension of React.js, right? If you knew React.js, and if you knew it well enough, that that means that you already know Next, and you know a portion of Next that is very much, you are basically there. And what it is able to, Next is also able to integrate with other third-party JavaScript libraries like Express.js. It has tight integration, and thereby give you an ecosystem for you to build a fully server-side rendered application. So this is what I call a true JavaScript full stack. full stack, because you only need to learn JavaScript as a language for you to develop across the board. That is, starting with React, then you have the front-end development that you do. Then with Next.js, you do the server-side rendering part. And if you knew React, you can go into mobile development. So with only JavaScript, you become a fully fledged developer for any platform that's on Earth, sort of, right? So Next.js, the good news about Next.js is that if you knew React, you don't need to forget it. And everything that you know about React is going to work, and there is nothing that you need to unlearn in terms of trying to fit into what Next.js is, right? So I wouldn't go deep into this because we already know why React is there, right? What benefit it comes. So Next.js, the benefit with Next.js is that it works with zero config. And if you really need to extend the configuration, you can go into really advanced use cases and get like you can tweak settings to the maximum. So on one side, it works with zero config with sensible defaults that is sufficient for most of the needs. But if you do need to go in for advanced use, you can do tweaking, which I have also done in the work that I do right now. And it also supports CSR. The main thing to take here is that it works with zero config.
Okay, I think Ruhaim's connection is breaking up. Yeah, so while we actually wait for Ruhaim, right? Let's take over. Yeah, so 1 second. Do you have Ruhaim back in? Nope. Let's see.
So until we probably sort out the technicalities, quick question on our YouTube live. Is there a way to fetch data real time in Gatsby? That's probably for Mohamed. Do you want to answer that quickly?
Sure. Yes, there is a way. Thanks for the question. Yes, there is a way to fetch. You can actually have Apollo connected to your Gatsby site, and you can connect through Apollo to your real-time GraphQL schema and fetch your data in real time. Or if you have a REST API, you can the traditional way of using Axios, you can fetch through REST API, either through async await or promises, for example. You can do it. It's just like a create React app, but a better replacement, as some would argue. There are actually talks on YouTube where you can actually use Gatsby as a replacement for create React app. Hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Thanks, Mohamed. So let's, is Ruhaim back? All right, so let's try to get into a live coding session. Harsha, would you be able to start on the...
Okay, so yes, so while we actually wait for Ruhaim, right? So let me take over So let's jump into the demo, right? And then let me share my screen. Right. Okay. Do you see my screen right now? The presentation. Just a quick thumbs up on the chat if you do. Okay, hold on. Okay. All right. Okay. So we actually wanted to like do a very thorough demonstration due to the time constraint. So let's actually stick to, I will go through the differences, like so what exactly step by step that I did to when you actually convert on the steps, converting your React application, which is this, right? The client-side rendered application, which is this. I mean, for your information, the cases has gone up to 92. And then, and yes, so this is the server rendered application, right? So what are the steps that I actually took the migrating this server rendered app to server side rendered app, right? So let's have the code side by side, right? By the way, so I have posted the link to the GitHub URL. So these two applications are in two branches. So if you check out the master branch, you'll get the server side client rendered application. So if you rendered, if you check out the branch, yeah. So if you check out the branch SSR, right, so you'll get this code. Okay, so the very first thing, to get your hands dirty right on, right? Surprise, surprise, is actually to set up your Next. So yeah, so setting up your Next, right? So you hop into a package.json, right? So you see that, and I'm using the Next. I'm using Next version 9.3, right? So if you have a look, right? So the couple of things that I've changed in this, right? So so in order to run a basic Next application, so you need Next as well as your React and the React DOM, right? So you can, the command, install your package dependencies, and then you move over to, so then let's move over to, what exactly are the differences, right? So by the looks of it, you can see that it both has a source folder, right? And then, but, it has something called a pages folder, which your client rendering app doesn't have, right? So remember back in those days when we were developing PHP applications and stuff, so you always have your pages defined, okay, so about.js, about.php would be this, right? But so if you want to, you can use the same sort of multi-page architecture, right? But and again, still do still actually build React applications, right? So if you have a look at the source, right, and then, like I said earlier, right, so you have your app component, that's the entry point to the application on app, right? So you have your header, and then, you have to define your routes, right? The routes will actually take in your, it's an extension of React Route DOM, right? So these are all the clients are routing, right? And also then you have your components, right? If you have any questions, just feel free to drop in a message, and also check out the branch as well. And then, so the very first thing that I did, right, the very first thing that you have to do, it actually create your pages folder, right? So this is so I've created the client rendering app using create React app boilerplate, and then over here, everything that I did was just to convert everything by manual, right? Unless if you, I mean, if you use something like a create next app, you will actually, get, uh, you know, uh, the pages directory and everything will be created by default for you, right? So the very first initial point, like, so when you actually run your code, right, it's gonna look for pages and index bar, right? So when you actually start your application, so over here, I'm actually calling the select country component, right? So have I done any changes to this? Not at all, right? So basically, so I'm actually using the same component that I'm actually using on client side over here as well, right? So so it's the same thing, right? I'm using it here, but does it actually help you to, render it on server side? So you see that there are two main optional, so the two main files, these are actually optional, right? For example, um, so if you take your app underscore app.js, right? Just like what you have on client rendered application. So app underscore app would be your entry point to the application. So every time each of these pages are being called, so you're going to wrap that entire page through a component, right? So this app.js will actually take that as a component, the page as a component. And so you see that I'm actually using a UI framework called Material UI, right? So from there, right? So for each component that it's actually passed in, right? I'm actually wrapping everything with my header as well as the theme, right? So my all the components would actually know, right? Okay, so I already have the theme passed into me, so I know what to do with this. So that's what actually allows you to yes. So that's what actually allows you to render your HTML as well as your CSS on your server side, right? And for an example, now you'll have this question, okay, how do I render 92, right? So just to quick run through this, I mean, again, this is a very simple application, so we have not, so everything is all together, so that we purposely put everything all together, so it would be so much easier, to follow through and understand, right? And for example, if you have a look at the number of cases, right? So on your server-side rendered application, let's move on to test. So I'm actually doing the same thing for country by country route as well as the test route, right? But on the test route, I'm doing something special, right? If you move down here, right? I'm calling this function called get server side props. Like I said earlier, this used to be, I mean, if you have worked with Next before, like, so it's just the same thing, when it comes to get initial props, right? But so if you use this function, right, so now you can call your API, right, before any of these actually renders, right, before the JavaScript actually sent to your browser and any of that is actually rendered, right? What you can actually do is, you can fetch the props, right, on your browser, on your server itself. So if you have a look, I mean, if you do a console logout here, right, and then you will see this not on your client side. Yeah, you will actually see this on your server side. It will actually print out all your data that you actually get using this API, right? And then what I'm actually doing, so when I'm actually rendering this component, select country, right? I'm actually passing it in data, right? And then from there onwards, right? And from, yes, so as well as this, So from there onwards, right? So what I'm doing, it's okay. So I have the server-side rendered app. I have the server-side rendered data, right? And then, okay, I know it's 92, right? So, okay. So I'm going to render a page with the number 92, and I'm actually going to send it to your the client's browser. So that's how it works. Now, for example, now let's see, if you look at this, so we haven't done map. It's a bit of a challenge for you as well. Like, okay, you see the map is not actually being rendered on the client, right? So map is actually now rendered on the server. What you can do is, okay, so use the same get server props function, and then see what if you can actually build that, send that initial content with the map itself. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? I know these other, I hope he had more time to actually, do this step by step, to show you how easy it is to actually migrate your existing client-side rendering application to a server-side rendering application. Yes, so yeah, that's about it for the demo, right? And then if you do have any questions, I posted the GitHub link, check it out. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, and we'll be happy to answer that. So yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. Do we have Ruhaim?
Yeah, I had a bad connection there because
Right.
I'm using my hotspot on my phone. So I got a phone call coming in, and then the connection dropped.
Okay.
So I'm back again.
All right, Ruhaim, take it over. I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So can I share the screen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. So shall I share my screen, Jonathan?
Yeah, sure, Ruhaim, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know at what point I had to stop.
If I'm not mistaken, we actually stopped at the pages folder for our server-rendered app. Yep, this one.
I think the connection is kind of not really great.
Right. Okay. Let's until Ruhaim actually solves the technical difficulties. So if you actually have a look at their pages folder, what we just went through, right? So you see that we are using something called app.js, right, as well as a document. So if you really look at 1 second. Yeah, if you have a look at the app folder, right, go into a little bit of detail on that, right? So if you see that on a on a React app as the entry point, you use the app component, right? So just like that. So now you have your underscore app as well. Okay, I'll share my screen.
Shall I share my screen?
Oh, Ruhaim, you're back. Okay, yes, take over.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm having a bad connection, but let's get this done and dusted. That's what I want to do. So, yeah. So starting with the pages folder, right? It is just as simple. Like I think even Harsha demonstrated certain things. So it's a matter of you just adding your file to your adding your JS file onto the pages folder, and then you have your Next.js application starting. That's it basically. So it's so simple. That is what I wanted to highlight here. And then data fetching functions, right? So like we discussed before, right? React, so Next.js supports both server-side rendering as well as static rendering. So for static rendering, it introduces these two functions. So by data fetching, what I mean is, like I demonstrated on my previous session, where and then we do some for the initial request. So for server-side rendering, and for that server-side rendering, we use the get server-side props function. And if we used it as a static site generator for static rendering, then we need to use these two functions. And the best part is that there is a thing called this hybrid system with Next.js, that you can have multiple pages within one application, but then some pages could be statically rendered while the other pages could be server-side rendered. So that is a benefit that Next.js offers to you out of the box. So this get initial props over here is something that predates the latest version of Next.js. So like myself as well as Harsha, all of us have been working with an older version of Next.js, which is actually one increment lesser. So I'm working with 9.2. So with 9.3, this new feature has been added. So the get initial props still works, but then it is recommended that we move on to the other functions that I mentioned above. So one thing to note is that all the only page components, every component that you add inside the pages folder are eligible to have these functions, and only those functions will ever get executed. If this was added in a non-page component, these functions wouldn't get rendered. So yeah, you get the best of both worlds, server-side rendering and static site rendering. Plus, there is this hybrid one where you could pick and choose based on the need of that specific page. So it's like best of the three worlds, I would say. So you have the hybrid version, you could go fully server-side, or you could go fully static site render, right? And then you have a seamless hydration, which with hydration, what you mean is that you saw Harsha, right? When he switched off his JavaScript on the browser, you still saw a web page that got loaded, right? But though the website gets loaded, if you had JavaScript on, you would also have the React application that loads afterwards. So the React application, what Next.js does is that it takes the React application, looks at whatever is there already on the DOM, and does an integration that is called hydration in React terms, which basically converts the statically rendered application into a React compatible version. So that too is done automatically, so you don't need to think much about it. Then we have automatic code splitting, like I told you earlier. So if we had like the example of CSS, I explained to you, right? With style CSS, what you could do is, if you only had just one div on your DOM and you had thousands of CSS classes, the code splitter is able to determine which classes this specific div requires and only send those styles over to the client. So that kind of auto loading, auto code splitting provides optimization for you to get a boost in the speed that we discussed before. And also, it also supports lazy loading and prefetching, where after you load something, you assume or you infer that this person, as soon as this page is loaded, this person is going to click on a specific button, maybe. Say it leads you to a contact us page. So before we wait to load the contact us page, waiting for the user to click the contact us button, what we do is we do a preloading behind the scenes. So just before as soon as the page is loaded and the browser is idle, the Next.js would go in and prefetch the necessary stuff, so that as soon as the contact us button or whatever button that we had, as soon as it is clicked, the next page would, just spit out in immediately. It would basically not even call the server because it's already preloaded on the client. And then it comes also with, special hooks and components that we could use. So yeah, I wouldn't go deep into this. And then, yeah, this is something that even I checked on the question and answers. There is some, there was a question on this. If you do need to develop, deploy whatever that you build, it's a matter of, just having your code in a Git repository. And every time you push into your Git repository, you are able to go into the Zeet Now platform, which is a server, which is a cloud platform specifically for hosting server-side rendered and statically rendered applications. So their concept is like, you develop, preview, and ship. So you develop with hot module support. As soon as you save the button, as soon as you make a change and save on your development environment, you will have it immediately shown on your browser. So that is the hot module support, hot module replacement support. And with preview, if you had your code in a Git repository, connect it with Zeet Now, then you are able to preview that in a dashboard within Zeet Now. And as soon as you are happy with the changes, you could just push your pull request into the master folder of your Git repository, and it would get automatically deployed based on whether that page was a statically rendered page or a server-side rendered page. So like lots of things happening under the hood, but because Zeet Now is something that is the same company, or Next.js and Zeet Now are the same company. They are the creators of Next.js. So they promised that they would give first-class support for Next.js. So this is the easiest way for you to ship something out, but then there are more complex ways as well. But we would stick to this for the sake of our discussion today. Then we have extensive documentation. Like the documentation is simple, but it is well set up. And another good thing that I see is that the old documentation is always archived, so you could go back to seeing an older version. Since there are a lot of changes taking place within the Next.js community, there are newer versions getting updated. So all the documentation, the link to get to the older documentation is there. So that is a really good thing. And then we have very active release cycles. Like they release like once in every 2 weeks. So you have a new kind of build coming out, and then there's a well laid out release plan. They have canonical releases, then they have full releases. So it's all well documented. So why I want to show this to you is that this is a very active project. So it is not something that is done and dead. It is living and it is growing. And yeah, someone had asked like to share some big applications that are using Gatsby.js. So these are some popular companies using Next.js. I think everything is familiar. I don't need to go much deep into this. So these are a few terms that you might like to look up after the end of this session. So we know that it will be there on YouTube, so you could go back and check them out. We will be sharing the slides also for you guys to have a look. We've already shared the GitHub repository. So these are a few words that you might need to Google and then look around to see what they are. And yeah, that's all that we do have for the day.
Yeah.
We just had the bonus session.
Just before we go into a quick Q&A, let me just pull this question up on this board. So just a quick note, if you guys on your experience on the webinar. Which will be really helpful for us to kind of increase this, and also given the situation, look to more of these in the coming weeks.
Also feel free to add in some suggestions, since we are also learning like doing stuff remotely. So maybe some things that you could that you would like to add, something that we shouldn't have done, please put them up in the chat, so that it will be helpful for us in the next sessions that we are planning to do. So we could take them up and then correct our mistakes and make this something that is better for everyone.
Cool. So with that, we'll just go for a quick Q&A. If you have any questions, some of the questions we want to take, maybe I'll hand over to the panelists and our speakers to quickly run through the question and answers.
Do you have any questions coming in from YouTube, Jonathan?
Not right now.
Okay.
I think we did answer a few on the go as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I would just put up a question so that we could have a discussion among ourselves. So
yep.
Until people might have a question, like, which is better, might be a question where, whether Gatsby is better or Next.js is better. So that will be a question based, like we could answer based on the use case that you have. Sometimes, none of it might be best, because if your need is not to go in for SEO, then yeah, static side a server side rendered application for a React application would not be would be an additional complexity that you add in. But then if you need a blazing fast website, yeah, then static site rendering is something that you could look into, which both Next.js and Gatsby supports. So like if you have third-party integrations that you need to do, if you want to go serverless, those things are helpful with static site rendering. And in terms of comparing the two libraries, like I am not in a good position to talk about Gatsby, because what I've seen about Gatsby is what Muhsin showcased today. So like with Next.js, based on the use case only, I think we will be able to give you a proper solution on which thing is going to be better for you and why.
Let me also add something.
Yeah.
There was a question on YouTube asking for a static product website, which one is better, Next or Gatsby? Like the easy answer is Gatsby, because like Gatsby is made for static sites. So that will be the best solution for that. But if in general, if you're asking what is best for a React app, Gatsby or Next.js, I would say for most of the sites, Gatsby is like better. I'm not saying it from my opinion, but I'm quoting from Syntax FM, which is Westboss and Scott Tolinsky. They have talked about it on a podcast earlier. So I have given the link on Zoom. So I'll post it on this as well. I'll post it on YouTube as well. So what they say is for most of the sites, they would use a Gatsby, and if they know what they're doing, and if they really need server-side rendering, then they would go for Next.js. I think that answers the question for both.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, if you have content, you have to dynamically render, so then would be, then the next would be your ideal framework.
Yeah, so adding to that, right, given the example that we demonstrated today, the COVID-19 tracker, right? So you have this number changing every few hours. So in that case, going for something like Next.js would be much more easier than you have a scheduler that runs to generate the static site every time a value changes. So it will be an overhead in that sense. So if you have a frequently changing data, this is my opinion, if you have a frequently changing data, just like the demonstration that we showcased today, where the data is coming in every hour or so, then I think Next.js wins in that point. In addition to that, like I explained in my talk, Next.js offers this hybrid feature where you could have some pages that are statically rendered, while you could have a few others that work with server-side rendering. So you get the best of both worlds in certain scenarios.
Yes.
Cool.
Right.
So there's also a question from Janil. Have you actually answered that for a static product website? Definitely SEO is a concern. Which one is better, Next or Gatsby? So,
I think Muhsin already answered
Yeah,
that.
that's the one I answered already.
all
The
right.
easy
Sorry.
answer
Yep.
is Gatsby. Yeah, Gatsby is the answer for that.
Yes.
Great. I think he happily answered that.
Okay.
All right.
So,
Cool. So thanks to our speakers, Harsha, Ruhaim, Mohamed. Thank you so much for being on this, putting a lot of hard work on this, and I'm sure we're going to continue more on this as well. And also thanks very especially to all those who are attending, making using this time to be here, and I'm sure going to get back with you all with more content on the future. So thank you guys. Have a good evening. So take care and stay safe.
All right.
stay safe, everyone.
Thank you so
Have a great
much. Stay safe,
Goodbye.
guys. Bye.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks for having us. Bye.